Jesse Johnson, I am so glad to have you here.
Yeah, me as well. Thanks for having me, Jenny.
Yeah, absolutely. As someone who runs as fast as me, if possibly faster, it's been absolutely great to get to know you. And I mean that in the best possible way. So that's kind of a nice lead in. How do you define work, Jesse?
Yeah, well, a long time ago, I heard that statement that it's only work if you wish you were doing something else. And so I really think that work is that thing that maybe isn't playing to your strengths, but I try to drive us all towards a life of purpose that's totally integrated spiritually, socially, emotionally, physically, and financially. So I guess it's the activities in the day that you wish you were doing something else. And and I might throw the modifier on there because I love your concept of just workaholism and situations of responsibility. On the other hand, is another segue that I think we get into, and sometimes we can have an overinflated sense of responsibility that makes us turn things that don't have to be work into really functional environments that we feel like we have to be on all the time. That drains our battery further. But I
Yeah.
digress.
No, so when we go back to like the beginning of your story, you talked about that, sense of overweighted sense of responsibility. Did you ever have that overweighted sense of responsibility?
Yeah, I think that's the thing that rears its head every once in a while if I don't take things kind of captive and be intentional. I mean, as you know, in my story, being an early father with adopting people, so it was a 20-year-old single guy to a father of four in a 6 month time frame with a 2-year old, 7, 8 year old, and a 16-year old. I think that came from the responsibility to change the world and save the world and take it all on it all right now. Um, and taking every little play session with the kids as an ability to train up the next generation of leaders and model. And I think if we forget that part of what we have to model for them is a healthy balance of our activities, then we can drift into an unhealthy state. So
So, what did your work life look like before that moment, before the 20-year-old adopting 4 kids?
yeah, I mean, I resonated a lot with your story. I think I was the 4.0 student taking 13 classes my freshman through junior year to just learn more. Uh, Several of which were college credits when I could through running start, captain the football team, working on top of that, leading the 2 and 3 a days sometimes.
Which is intense. My son's in football, so I know this firsthand.
Yeah. And so it really was that. And that stemmed from even watching my family work 16, 18-hour work days in the restaurant business growing up, and how that just played in where, okay, this is just what we do is we work all the time, and there's no problem that we can't outwork, and we just have to put one foot in front of the other. And it wasn't until that started to implode and I really got some mentorship in my life that helped me go like, well, there's the component of doing things right, and then it's, are you doing the right things, and the ability to refocus that energy in a more productive, healthy way. So
And where in that journey did you have that moment where you were like, "Oh, maybe I'm not working on the right things?"
yeah, so let's see, if I rewind the tape back to when I was 19 years old. I was still working quite a bit and had went to university. I had my assault happen that derailed all my plans and forced me back into a state of reevaluating my whole life. And very quickly, when my concussion wore off, I think you remember that part, but I got assaulted by 4 football players when I went to university. And it derailed my plans of being an investing consultant, working my way up the corporate pyramid of an investment firm, and then branching out and doing my own thing. And when that was gone, I'd also had to rebuild my whole identity because I went from 175 pounds of athlete to 130 pounds skin and bone. I'd lost my income because most of the things I did were physical labor. And I'd lost a relationship. I lost my whole sense of security. So that really turned, okay, what am I going to do now? Into, I just fell back into those bad habits of working 16, 18-hour days. And in this case, it just was in the gambling industry, which was even tied up more with the wrong crowd that I didn't want to live with. I ended up purchasing my first traditional business and adopting the kids at the same time. And 80-hour to 100-hour work weeks weren't conducive as a brand new person trying to figure out how to be a husband, how to be a father, and go through the foster adoptive programs with the state and lead 10 to 15 employees on payroll with something left over for the family when I was done. And that's where I started to make the shift of going, there has to be a better way, but I didn't know how until I had somebody come into my life, probably early 20s, 6 months to 18 months after that, and took me under their wing and started to help me see the light, so to speak.
So I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into that moment of being pulled under somebody's wing. Where were
Yeah.
you at in the moment it happened? What did it look like and feel like?
Yeah. It was, gosh, what did it feel like? A breath of fresh air when I finally got the offer to work with somebody that had been down the road further. It's kind of like when you're talking about a piece of the map. This was the person that not only had the map, they had sketched the extra paths in it that they had taken and all those kind of things. And one of my primary influencers, the gentleman, was he'd built the largest privately owned chain of pharmacies in the whole state of Washington, commercial real estate, walk-in clinics, very successful from a financial perspective, business owner, but also legacy for his family because he had gone through very similar circumstances when he was in his younger years, and now he was paying it forward. And within a handful of months before really getting to get connected with him and pick some of his brain, I was in the stereotypical entrepreneurial peaks and valleys of going backwards just to make payroll, crying in the shower as the sole breadwinner for the family. And yeah, it felt like a breath of fresh air when a handful of months even before being on that path, I felt like my whole world was imploding. And yeah, I think that's probably answering your question.
Yeah, and people don't um often take enough time to really acknowledge what you just said, so I want to pause there for a moment. There's moments in entrepreneurship where we are crying in the shower because we can't make payroll. Like that's a very very real part of the difficulty of starting and running a business. And it's hard. It's really hard.
Oh man. Yep. And it's this constant tension point. One of the things that I had to learn early on was how to prioritize relationships. And we hear that if everything's important, then nothing's important. And if you take that principle back into our relationships, then it's, is my employee at my company more important than my kids? And I don't think it's a black and white static answer. I think there's a continuum and a tension point that we have to manage on a consistent basis. But when you've had employees for a while, or you've got people, you have them and their kids and their families and their community that you're looking out for, which when you're creating and making jobs available to them, that weight sits on your shoulders if you don't know how to put it in perspective. And so that was definitely me. I was so firmly rooted in, um, I have to do it all. I have to be it all. I can't let them down. And it took the responsibility off of that individual to take care of their family
Mhm.
and make things, which was unhealthy. But
Mhm. Yeah, these are the tough tight ropes that we walk. This mutually co-created relationships that are so much a part of business. But a
mhm,
great entrepreneur does have a high sense of responsibility. So we're kind of back to your original theme, which is when do you need to pause and not keep taking on the responsibility, but create this network of co created relationships that can carry some of that burden? How did you make that shift? Because I'm hearing example after example of that.
yeah. Well, the funny part is I'm one of the most analytical people on the planet that has to thrive on systems. So I had to build a system to realize it was my responsibility to take the time to pause and assess my responsibilities. And it's funny when you say it out loud that way, but how I hacked my brain to prioritize the time was to realize that you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't get what you
Mhm.
don't have. And so if I wasn't going to assess those myself, then I was actually uh, taking off the most important responsibility that I have as a leader, as a father, as a community leader, all those kind of things to go, where am I best suited to be? And how do I maintain those healthy rhythms of replenishment, rest, and
Mhm.
all the other R's that you could throw in there?
And I'm glad you said that, the filling the cup thing comes up as a theme for good reason because we have to have a full cup to be able to give back. But how did you like, where was your cup at? What did where did it need to be, and what did you do to close that gap so that your cup specifically for your, like you said, your psyche was full?
Yeah, I think my cup was so empty. It was like a negative bank account that had been overdrawn forever, and it almost felt like you couldn't get another loan because you damaged your line of credit for so long, and it was challenging. That's where it was, but I knew that's where it shouldn't live or shouldn't be. But I was running on empty so much, and I had to realize that if I didn't ask for help or accept help or receive from other people, I was, by consequence, I was actually taking away their opportunity to give and to fill voids for other people. And then I put it in the perspective for me of, man, if I didn't allow them to help me do this, no matter how meaningless the task seemed to me, or um, any of those things, that I was actually hurting them and our relationship. And so I went from really negative to, yeah, I need some help, and raising my hand and going, I don't know what I need to ask, but I know that this isn't working. And I surrounded myself with people that could ask the right questions, pull it out of me. And then before you knew it, I became more aware and more equipped to actually go, oh, that's what's going on in my heart. That's what's going on in my finances. That's what's going on in my relationships. And then I would seek people out that had expertise in that area and ask them, to where now I don't have it all figured out. None of us do, right? It's that constant
Mhm.
tension point. But I'm very blessed that I have very competent and like-minded individuals with the same value system that help keep me in check if I start to drift, or they're not afraid to come to the aid. You know what I mean? When you need that support, which we all need.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier highly analytical personality, so, that's love that because it's a very real thing. So when you have that highly analytical personality and you have to kind of hack your brain a little bit, you talked about needing to have others surround you to help you pull out the questions. What was that? Sometimes there's a dissonance and we're highly analytical and we wanna do stuff on our own, right? And then there's the feeling and the connectedness part of it and the instinct and allowing some of that to get extracted and pulled out, and they can sometimes war with each other. So, how did you bridge that gap between
Yeah.
the 2 very important parts of our psyche?
Yeah. Again, the funny part is I tapped into the more emotional side and the deeper sense by building a system of realizing that I'm only operating on part of what I was gifted if I don't tap into that side. And it's kind of like you wouldn't drive your car if you knew that four cylinders in an eight-cylinder vehicle weren't working. So how are you going to connect the dots and make sure that that shift happens? And sometimes you have to go ask the mechanic if you don't know how to do it. Was kind of how I was thinking about it at the time. And so then I would find people that would teach me how to smile. It was
Mhm.
funny because the amount of people in my life that would, I've got a big heart. I care deeply about individuals. I am very excited and everything, well, often. But I've had several people go, "Well, Jesse, if that's the case, why don't you inform your face?" Like,
I love that. That's that's great.
and learning how to be expressive and have fun and lighten up. And it's hilarious now because I see some of the individuals that knew me pre this shift,
Mhm.
when I'd walked around with a poker face on all the time and was so in my head and nobody could tell what was going on, to now, oftentimes I get more complimented on my humor and my joy in different areas, or how present I am with individuals. And like the compliments have completely shifted from, you're a hard worker, you get stuff done. I know if I hand it to you, it's going to get accomplished, which is still underlying, and people still say that today. But it shifted to, man, that was the funniest thing I've ever heard, or that was so fun to be around, or it was all of the more emotional connected pieces that I'm finding people often when I'm doing a workshop or I'm working with them as a client, or just as a friend over a dinner, that's what they connect with the most.
That's amazing. So it sounds like the systems you built helped you integrate those 2 parts a little bit more seamlessly.
Yeah, I would say so.
So what do your systems look like? As a kinesthetic toucher feeler, let's get detailed. Are we talking spreadsheets, frameworks? Like what does a system look like to you?
Spreadsheets are definitely up there. I think that that would be one. I think oftentimes calendar is probably one of the things that most people acknowledge as a single dad with 6 kids and 5 or 6 different organizations that I lead and have founded. It's how do you get it all in? And a lot of that ends up coming down to priorities. I think some of the intangible systems that aren't quite softwares to automate something or like a scheduling system, right? You can go, okay, I'm going to take my year and go, what major conferences do I need to be at? And then you break it into the quarter and set your major rocks, and then going down in the month, and then in the week, and then the day. And then you have your people to call and people to meet with list that then backfill those as time frees up. But you can automate a lot of that with things today of scheduling links and stuff you can send to people and they can book in and whatnot. I think the thought process systems and prioritization has been more the big ones that I try to lead people through, even to leveling relationships of level one being my future spouse and my kids and going, okay, every decision I get faced with and every project I take on, I have to evaluate, is this helping that level of relationships in a positive, neutral, or negative way, or is it affecting them in one of those paths? And then I boil it down into level two, level three, and level four, and I'll reevaluate those quarterly as touch bases. And I could nerd out with you for
Oh,
hours
yeah.
on all of these different systems, I'm sure.
Well, relationships are, they're so fluid, but understanding where they sit in that and how they're moving, and how that fluidity is flowing is incredibly important as things move because, they don't always sit in the same place at the same time, but it's important to understand that ecosystem and where you're investing your time, your energy, and your heart, in order to make your greatest impact in a way that is mutually beneficial. Like everybody's leaning in together and co-creating something versus something that just drains you. So it sounds like you found a way to do that, to talk to that left part of your brain and make it work with the right part.
Yeah. Well, and even just piggybacking off that point a little bit, it's even when circumstances change that aren't affecting that specific thing. And in your story, one of the things that I know we connect on and is how you, when a priority outside of the existing circumstance happens that changes the rest of them, how integrated they are with your personal journey and story, even of acknowledging that and pivoting. And there's a lot of people right now in this economy that if a layoff happens, opportunities change, or them continuing to take time away from certain other priorities at the house with whether it's health issues or financial issues or projects as people get older or younger and like the younger demographic, I guess. Those are all fluid and you have to reevaluate them in the right touch points.
Yeah, I completely agree. We are way more moldable than we give ourselves credit for. And unfortunately, when we do think about our moldability, we often think about it in the negative, as in I had to twist myself in a pretzel to make this work, versus we can actually foundationally evolve and grow ourselves in this amazing way to the point where almost that person that we once were, almost can't recognize them anymore. It's like, wow, I'm that different. And not because I molded myself into a pretzel, but because I have transformed that much.
Yep.
That's
Yeah, I
powerful. So,
agree.
your transformation, then, that's a nice segue into your transformation. So, you were there with your kids, you had someone take you under your wings. What
Yeah.
did what was at the core of that transformation?
I tapped back into the goals that I had when I was a kid. Right. And it was I wanted to change the world. I think the path that I picked when I was a kid initially was to be a professional quarterback in the NFL, not because I loved football. I didn't even know at the time. I decided that's what I wanted to do at 6 years old. And it was largely, as I evaluate that now, it was because the people that I respected that were older than me would watch Monday Night Football. and they would see the people on the screen and they would interact in big ways, and the people on the screen impacted them. And I saw a quarterback get interviewed one time and I went, man, I could be a role model to people, or I could do that. And so I picked that path. And then along the way, I just lost who that was. And so then by the time I was taken under the wing of other individuals that could help me, and I had responsibility, and I really saw firsthand what I needed to do to lead my immediate family, I went, man, I need to tap back into that. And I just kept cultivating that piece of how am I going to impact the world, because I'd already made the decision. And that led me into where I now believe that I exist to amplify significance in people's lives. That's super clear, super simple. Everybody has a significant contribution to play in society. And I was gifted with strengths and talents and resources to help amplify that to as many people. And every decision I make gets filtered to how does this do this in my levels of relationships, all the way down to being on a podcast like this. I love what you're doing with people to help them understand, hey, one, you don't need to judge your journey to other people's journey. There's lots of people that have different pieces of the puzzle and map that are all vastly different, but are all around these core tenets.
Mhm.
And with the right examples, then we can start to go, oh, if they can do it, so can I. Or if they shifted that, then so can I. I can relate to that. And we start to make the necessary changes. So, yeah, that's where I went to. They helped me clean up spiritually, socially, emotionally, physically, financially, realize that not one was more important than the other, but most people spend almost all their time on the financial component. So they helped me build a path to then get that piece almost out of the equation and build some assets that allowed me to have freedom and flexibility in my life to pick different opportunities. And once that was in place, or in the same time, they were helping me with my leadership competencies, which affected my parenting and my spousal relationships and my community relationships. And now I just am committed to that process of impacting and moving forward with people, and screaming it from the rooftops that just because it's been this way, it doesn't have to continue to go that way. Or just because that might be your history, it doesn't have to be your destiny. Like, you get to pick.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you talked about solving the financial first. We tend to spend too much of our time there, but also there is a reality that if the financial isn't to the point where it can physically provide your needs, it makes it very difficult. I was talking with a group of entrepreneurs over this last week at a conference I was at about the veil it can leave over you if you're concerned about money. And so how did you take that problem and say, "This is what it needs to look like for me to let go of this and start moving into these other areas that I also have to focus on?"
Man, that is a great question. Now, um, I'd also point out, like, that is the tension point on when it comes to the financial walk of life. You have a couple of extremes, and one extreme is the people that are so frugal, they're so
Mhm.
risk averse, they're so detailed, dot the I's, cross the T's, all the investment, everything, but it's super selfish, in my opinion, because it's all about them. And then you get to the other end of the spectrum, and there's the people that are like, fast and loose.
Yeah.
I'll put it on a credit card. It's all going to work out, and everything. But then they end up being a burden on their family sometimes if circumstances don't change or they don't transform. Me, it was back to the, okay, let's build a system. Well, I need to be awareness of where my money's going. I need to be aware of, or drive awareness to that. And then I need to drive awareness to how much money do I actually need, not just want. And that, I think that's another one where oftentimes people go, well, I really need this. Well, no, you don't. And then once I did have those needs, and then, okay, well, what do I actually want? That gives you a gap of, if this is what I need to make, this is what I want to make. Then you can start to reverse engineer that of, is the revenue model I'm currently participating in going to help me get there faster, more efficiently, or with less risk? Will it ever get me there at all? If the answer is no, I need to shift.
Yeah.
And I think it's insane because we have all these circumstances in our daily life. If somebody plugged in GPS coordinates, for example, and they put in two different key coordinates, where they're currently at and then where it is that they want to get to. And then on a lot of modern day cell phones, for people that have smartphones, that gives you also transit options. Are you walking? Are you riding a bike? Are you taking a public transit? Are you flying? And all of those are very different vehicles. Well, a lot of people are in a revenue model that will never get them to their goals, but because they've never evaluated how much money they need, which is kind of where they're at, what kind of goals that they have that they're stretching towards. They don't know how to pick those. And I think that once they understand those, then you can get people around you, whether it's a coach, consultant, a mentor, anybody like that, that can come alongside and go, hey, have you thought about these transferable skills going into this market or restructuring it this way? The same way that somebody would do a remodel on their house when they start to have more kids and they need more space. It's just a changing situation that starts with making the decision that you're going to do the awareness, you're going to get aware of what your circumstances landscape is.
I agree completely. We undervalue sometimes a sustainably growing business that is healthy from the get go and makes adjustments when it's not, and valuing that over the sides of the pie, shall we say. So, it's one of the
Mhm.
philosophies that helped me a lot in my last business was focusing more on sustainable growth versus I'm going to run after a bigger and bigger and bigger pie. I can honestly say, yes, I never was rich, but I never didn't make a solid profit and a full time income the whole time I had that business. And that's really what most of us want, right?
Yep.
Oh, so
Well,
that's
I
beautiful.
loved, sorry, I
No,
loved
you go
how
ahead.
in your, when we first met and I got to listen to your, I think it was episode one of your podcast, and you were really sharing a lot of your story. And you talked about getting into work and how you didn't struggle with a lot of the challenges that most people had, even though you weren't a unicorn founder and things like that. And I think that comparison disease gets in for a lot of people today that makes them get back into workaholism. They they buy the house that they can't afford to impress the people they don't care about, and now that shifted their needs of income and it pushed everything back out of whack to where now they can't take a step down in pay. They can't do an exercise about how much value are they getting financially from what they're choosing to do for an income versus the vitality that it's giving them. And I just, you can build all those systems and still be running harder than you need to, and unless you architect it out the way that it should afford the lifestyle. And I think that was what really hit me the most was, man, I don't want to wake up 5 years from now and hate everything I'm doing. So how can I lay the blueprints now? And it's easier to fix it on paper in this plan than down the road, even without a crystal ball to know exactly what the economy is going to do or what's happening next.
So hindsight is 2020. So I'm going to try to quickly recap what you've told me and then ask for your kind of like final takeaway. So it sounds like a huge part of this was understanding how your brain worked and creating systems that helped you move from where you were to where you wanted to be. Surrounding yourself with other people that were a little bit ahead of where you were that and allowing them to help you and vice versa. You've spent a lot of time helping those who are trying to walk the path that you've walked. So being able to take not only help people, but also accept help from others. And then getting really clear on what you actually need and actually want and architecting a balanced work and life that enables that. Did I summarize the last 30 minutes semi okay?
Yeah, I think that's great.
So, what's your kind of big lesson in like as we wrap up here? Like I said, hindsight's 2020, but what's the one thing that you learned that you really want people to walk away from this with?
I want them to really firmly root themselves in why are they here. And if they had a halftime talk with themselves, it's their end goal when they're on their deathbed. What is it that they want to be remembered for, or having lived the life of, or things like that? And then reverse engineering that success. And the four major points of that is there's why we do what we do, who we do it with, or who can help us do it, how what we do works, and what it is. And I find that almost everybody goes the what road. They get asked what they want to be when they grow up. What do you want to do next? That has them then go to learn how to do that without questioning, is it actually on the right path? And then they end up going with who, and they're casually associating themselves with people, which is one of the primary influences in our lives. And then they wake up on their deathbed going, why did I do that to begin with?
Yeah.
Instead of flipping that in whatever interval you want and going, why am I about to make the decision I'm about to make? Why am I put here on the planet? Finding the people that I need to associate myself with that will live that kind of life, will teach me the real world applicable education of how to accomplish that life. And then losing the comparison disease status and ego of the what it is or what it looks like, and knowing that it was rooted in the right values to begin with.
Well, thank you so much, Jesse. Your why showed up today, and I'm super grateful to have you. You guys, Jesse is the founding CEO of Champion Empire. He's a Washington based collection of businesses and professionals that are united to support free enterprise, small business, and the community in which we live. Jesse's vision for Champion is to foster more generosity than any other leadership network and to be known as the trusted guide for information and resources needed to grow. He has been a business owner from a young age, which he talked about today, as well as a devoted father of six, a lifelong learner, and an advisor to those who want to make an impact rather than just an income. You can find out how to contact him in the show notes. And Jesse, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jenny. Really appreciate it.